The first day he walked into our high school, nobody noticed him. At least, that's how it seemed. Not because he wanted to be invisible, but because he didn't stand out. He wore a plain gray hoodie that swallowed his small frame, jeans that had seen better days, and sneakers that were slightly too big. He carried a backpack that looked like it weighed a ton, slung over one shoulder, and his dark brown hair fell over his forehead just enough to hide the edges of his eyes. There was a weight about him, a quietness that whispered, "Don't bother me, don't expect me to fit in." And somehow, everyone respected it. Or maybe ignored it. I first noticed him in the cafeteria, standing by the vending machine, looking at the line of students with a faint anxiety etched on his face. His hands were stuffed into his hoodie pockets, and he shifted from foot to foot, almost as if he didn't know where he belonged. Students walked past him without a glance. I could see the hesitance in his posture. The kind that makes you feel like the world is too bright, too loud, and far too cruel to even consider stepping fully into it. Most of the time, students either ignore the quiet ones or quietly make fun of them behind their backs. But something about him tugged at me. I don't know why. I had friends, I was popular enough to navigate the chaos of high school without trouble. But seeing someone shrink into themselves like that made my chest tighten. It wasn't long before I discovered his name. A teacher called it out in roll, her voice echoing across the noisy classroom. Ethan Brooks. That was it. Ethan Brooks. Nothing fancy, no nickname, no sense of belonging attached to it. Just a name. From that moment, I made a small, quiet decision. I would be his first friend. I started small. A wave in the hallway. A smile when our paths crossed. I would sometimes save a seat for him at lunch, even though I didn't expect him to sit there. Some days he did. Some days he didn't. And each time he did, I learned a little more about him. His voice was soft but steady, the kind of voice that could disappear if you didn't pay attention. He didn't share much, just a few words about a homework assignment, a comment about the weather, or a fleeting joke that barely cracked a grin. But I could sense that every word was deliberate, each sentence measured. We never talked about his life outside school. I didn't ask and he didn't volunteer. But over time, I pieced together fragments. He'd transferred from another district, his old school too chaotic, too unkind. He had no friends there either. His parents were always busy, his mom worked long hours, his dad traveled often for work. And then there was the constant undercurrent of something heavier, something more profound. A loneliness that had been following him for years, like a shadow that refused to leave. One day, I found him sitting on the edge of the football field after school, staring at the empty bleachers. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple, a silent twilight. I sat beside him, careful not to startle him. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, just continued staring. "I brought extra snacks," I said quietly, holding up a small paper bag. "If you want." He hesitated, then took one without looking. The way he clutched it, as if it were a lifeline, made my chest tighten. I didn't force conversation. I just sat there in silence. And that was the beginning. Days turned into weeks. Small gestures became our routine. I would save him a seat in class, share my notes if he missed something, and occasionally invite him to sit with my friends during lunch. Sometimes he declined, and sometimes he accepted. Slowly, ever so slowly, he started to open up. He told me about his love for drawing, sketching landscapes, people he imagined, comic book characters he created in his own mind. He shared his favorite books, ones that no one else seemed to read, and the music that resonated with him, soft tracks that made him feel less invisible. I remember the first time he laughed around me. Not a nervous chuckle, but a real laugh. I couldn't help smiling. It wasn't long before I realized something important. I wasn't just helping him make friends or survive high school. I was giving him a sense of belonging, a feeling that someone in the world actually cared. And in turn, he was teaching me something too. He taught me patience, empathy, and the quiet strength it takes to keep going when the world is consistently unkind. But high school is never simple. Small kindnesses, as I had learned, are often overshadowed by cruelty. One morning, a group of seniors cornered him near his locker. I had seen it happen in the hallway moments before I could reach him. They mocked him, shoved him, and called him names that cut deeper than any physical blow could. He tried to shrink back, to disappear. But he couldn't escape entirely. I ran toward them, heart hammering, fists clenched. "Leave him alone," I shouted. They turned toward me, sneers on their faces, ready to escalate. "Or what?" One of them spat. I froze, realizing the truth. High school bullies don't back down because of words. They only back down because of fear. And I wasn't sure I could instill that in them. But then, Ethan did something that changed everything. He stepped forward. Not aggressively. Not recklessly. Just forward. "I don't need your approval," he said, voice soft but unwavering. "I don't belong in your world, and that's fine." The words cut through the tension like a knife. The bullies looked at each other, unsure how to respond. That one moment of quiet courage, something they weren't expecting, was enough. They slunk away, leaving us standing in the hallway, the echo of their laughter fading behind us. Ethan turned to me, eyes wide. And for the first time, I saw gratitude. Pure, unfiltered gratitude. "I didn't think anyone would ever stand up for me," he whispered. "You don't have to go through this alone," I said. The bond we formed over those months grew into something unbreakable. We became each other's anchor. I introduced him slowly to my circle of friends. Some accepted him immediately, others were cautious, but eventually, he found his place. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when he'd retreat. Days when the weight of being a quiet kid in a noisy world pressed down on him. But he always returned, always tried again. The small gestures, sharing lunch, sitting together in the library, walking home from school, became a ritual. They were more than friendship. They were survival. They were trust. Then came senior year. The pressure of college applications, the looming uncertainty, the cruel reminder that high school was ending and the world beyond could be even less kind. And yet, Ethan faced it with a quiet resilience I couldn't help but admire. I'd always known he had a backbone, but senior year proved it. He volunteered to tutor younger students, joined a few clubs, and even started submitting his sketches to competitions. Each time he succeeded, even in small ways, his confidence grew. And with that growth, our bond strengthened further. But high school has a way of testing people. And sometimes the real test comes when you least expect it. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when everything changed. I remember because the sky was gray, and a storm had rolled in earlier, leaving the streets slick with rain. I had just picked up my backpack from my locker when I saw a commotion near the gym. A group of students were yelling, their voices sharp and frantic. I pushed through the crowd and saw him, Ethan, cornered by the principal, a social worker, and 2 police officers. My heart stopped. "What's happening?" I shouted, pushing past people. "He's been accused of something," a friend whispered. I ran forward. "No, he hasn't. You don't know him like I do." The police officer raised a hand. "Step back, please." But I couldn't. I wouldn't. He had trusted me, confided in me, allowed me into his world. And now, the world was trying to tear him apart. Ethan looked at me, eyes wide with panic. I ran to him, gripping his shoulder. "I'll be right here. I won't let them hurt you," I said. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside. And that's when I realized, the quiet boy I had helped months ago, the one no one cared about, was about to show me what courage really meant. Because sometimes, the people you help don't just survive. They come back to save you. The next few days after that stormy afternoon were a blur. The school called my parents immediately, and I remember the look in their eyes when I tried to explain everything. They were confused, shocked, and frankly terrified. I barely had time to process what had happened myself. My stomach churned every time I thought about Ethan sitting there in front of the principal, the social worker, and the officers, the weight of an accusation I knew he didn't deserve pressing on him. It all started with a rumor, a whisper in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone had seen my backpack near the gym during an incident that they didn't fully understand. They had jumped to conclusions, as people always do, and attached my name to a series of misunderstandings and petty thefts around school. I didn't care about the petty things. I cared about Ethan, because I knew he wouldn't lie about it, because he had never lied about anything serious to me. When I arrived at the police station with my parents, my heart was hammering. I'd never been inside a place like that before, and I could feel the tension in the air like a living thing. Ethan was sitting in the waiting area, his usual stoicism replaced with visible anxiety. His hands trembled slightly as he held a folder close to his chest. I sat beside him, placing my hand over his. "You're going to be okay. I've got you," I whispered. He gave me a faint nod. "I hope you're right," he said, his voice soft but steady. The same voice that had once scared off a group of bullies with nothing more than quiet confidence. The first hearings were procedural, boring, and yet terrifying. The officers asked questions about where we were, what we saw, and what we knew. I was honest as I could be, explaining every detail, recounting every interaction with precision. And then came the part that made my stomach twist. They told me that the situation had escalated. It wasn't just a school misunderstanding anymore. Someone had framed me. Someone had set up a situation that could have ruined my life. Ethan's eyes widened slightly at this revelation. I could see the recognition in his gaze, the same careful calculation he always had, the analytical way he processed information. He realized that this wasn't just about me. This was about a bigger, darker plan. The trial date was set. And for the first time in my life, I understood what fear truly meant. Not the fear of bullies, not the fear of failing a test, but the fear of losing everything you care about because someone else decided you were expendable. The weeks leading up to the trial were torturous. I barely slept. Every sound at night made me jump. Every message on my phone made my heart race. I spent hours rehearsing my testimony, making sure I could recount every detail, every timeline, every interaction accurately. But the truth was heavier than I could have imagined. Ethan and I met almost daily to prepare together. He had grown in ways I hadn't noticed before. His quiet demeanor now carried a fierce intelligence, a clarity of purpose. We went over documents, text messages, and social media interactions that had been twisted and used against me. He pointed out inconsistencies, loopholes, and gaps in the evidence. He reminded me of facts I had forgotten. And he reminded me why we had to tell the truth, no matter how messy or uncomfortable it was. "You're not alone in this," he said one evening as we pored over yet another stack of papers in my living room. "I know what they're trying to do, and I won't let them get away with it." I swallowed, nodding. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Ethan. I don't think I could survive this alone." He gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Then don't. You don't have to." The day of the trial arrived like a storm I couldn't escape. The courthouse loomed over me, intimidating and impersonal. People moved about in suits and uniforms, their faces unreadable. I felt small, fragile, and unprepared. My parents walked beside me, their hands tight around mine, a mixture of fear and hope etched on their faces. And then I saw him, Ethan, standing at the witness table, calm, composed, and ready. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious onlookers, and legal teams filled the space. The air was thick with anticipation. I couldn't focus on anything except Ethan. He looked at me briefly, giving me a nod, and that simple gesture gave me more courage than anything else ever had. The prosecutor began, laying out their case with clinical precision. They recounted events, misrepresented facts, and tried to paint me as guilty. Each statement sent shivers down my spine. But then came Ethan's turn. He stood, straight-backed, and began to speak. His voice carried throughout the room, calm yet commanding attention. "I know what happened," he said. "And I know who is telling the truth." Every word he spoke was deliberate. He recounted the timeline, clarified misunderstandings, and provided details no one else could. He told the judge about my character, our friendship, and the events leading up to the accusations. He spoke about the people who had tried to manipulate the situation, and he did so without hesitation. And then came the part one wasn't prepared for. The part that made my chest tighten so much I thought I might collapse. He testified about moments from years before, moments I had almost forgotten. He told the court about the quiet boy in the cafeteria, the lonely student who no one cared about, the boy I had helped and befriended. He explained how we had navigated the complexities of high school together, how we had supported each other, and how our bond had become a lifeline. Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened. He was giving more than testimony. He was giving proof that the truth could not be twisted. He was giving me life itself. The opposing counsel tried to discredit him, bringing up trivial inconsistencies and trying to paint him as biased. But Ethan was prepared. He countered with facts, calm reasoning, and unshakable integrity. The more he spoke, the more the courtroom seemed to shift. The tension lifted, replaced by a quiet awe. People listened because what he was saying wasn't just words, it was the weight of truth. By the end of the day, the judge and jury had seen everything through Ethan's eyes. The prosecutor's attacks had failed. Our side, backed by evidence and Ethan's testimony, had built an undeniable case. I remember walking out of the courthouse that evening, the sky a mix of purples and deepening blue, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My parents hugged me tightly, their relief almost unbearable. But I didn't look at them, I looked for Ethan. He was standing a few feet away, waiting. When our eyes met, he gave me a small, shy smile. I walked over, and we embraced. "You saved me," I whispered. "No," he said softly. "We saved each other." Over the following weeks, life returned to a kind of normalcy, though nothing would ever be quite the same. The ordeal had changed me, changed Ethan, and changed the way my parents saw the world. I had always known that kindness mattered, that small gestures could alter the course of someone's life. But seeing it in action, seeing Ethan testify and stand up for me in the most terrifying situation of my life, made that knowledge tangible. He had been the quiet one, the transfer student who seemed invisible. And yet, when the stakes were highest, he became the person I relied on most, the person who could wield quiet courage like a weapon, and ultimately save my life. As for me, I learned lessons I would never forget. I learned that friendship can be life-saving, that courage doesn't always roar, and that sometimes the smallest voices can echo louder than anyone ever expects. After the trial ended and the verdict was in our favor, there was a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Relief, because the truth had finally been heard and justice had been served. Exhaustion, because the weight of everything, years of tension, fear, and anxiety, had finally come crashing down all at once. My parents hugged me tightly, tears streaming down their faces, whispering apologies and gratitude. They had realized in a way they never truly understood before, just how much the people around us could shape our lives. How one quiet act of kindness could save someone completely. But as comforting as my family's embrace was, my first instinct was to look for Ethan. I found him leaning against the courthouse steps, calm and composed, as if the entire ordeal had been another day in his quiet, methodical life. When our eyes met, he smiled faintly, and I realized that no amount of words could ever properly convey my gratitude. He had not only testified on my behalf, but he had reminded me, in the most tangible way possible, what true loyalty and courage looked like. We walked out together, side by side, and I could finally breathe freely again. For the first time in months, I felt as if a shadow that had been looming over my life had lifted. Ethan had taught me a lesson that I would carry forever. Sometimes, the most extraordinary acts come from those who are underestimated, those who quietly observe, patiently wait, and act decisively when it matters most. The weeks that followed were surreal. Life went back to what people would call normal, though I knew it would never be the same again. My classmates looked at me differently, some with curiosity, others with admiration, but mostly with a newfound respect that had nothing to do with the rumors or misunderstandings. Ethan, though, remained remarkably unchanged, calm, composed, and as quietly brilliant as ever. He didn't seek recognition for what he had done. He simply carried himself with the understated confidence of someone who knew they had done the right thing, nothing more, nothing less. I remember one afternoon, a few weeks after the verdict, sitting on the park bench outside the courthouse with him. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, warm shadows over the sidewalk. The air smelled of wet leaves and freshly cut grass, a strange juxtaposition to the months of fear and tension that had led to this moment. "Do you realize what you did for me?" I asked him softly, almost afraid that saying it aloud would somehow diminish it. He shrugged lightly, a faint smile on his lips. "I just did what anyone would do. The truth matters. You mattered. That's enough." But I knew it was far more than that. He had risked everything to ensure that I had a chance to reclaim my life. He had stood up when the entire system, friends, and even adults were hesitant or uncertain. His courage had been the anchor I needed to survive the storm. In the months after the trial, Our friendship transformed in ways I could never have imagined. We were no longer just classmates or friends navigating high school together. We had become collaborators in survival, partners in truth, and witnesses to each other's strength. Ethan started taking small steps to open up about his own struggles. He shared stories of moving schools, being invisible in a sea of strangers, and how he had often been overlooked, much like the quiet transfers he helped and befriended in the past. I realized that his heroism was not a sudden burst of bravery. It was built on years of empathy, understanding, and resilience. He had known what it felt like to be unseen and undervalued, and he refused to let anyone else endure that pain, especially me. Our families began to interact more openly as well. My parents, initially overwhelmed by the experience, came to respect Ethan in ways that transcended simple gratitude. They invited him over for dinners, casual afternoons, and even family holidays. They saw firsthand how someone who had once been a quiet observer could teach lessons about courage, loyalty, and morality that no textbook or parental guidance ever could. As for me, the trial had been a turning point. I began to understand the value of speaking up, trusting those who truly care, and leaning on the strength of people who act selflessly. I also learned to recognize the quiet heroes around me. Those who don't seek attention or accolades, but change lives in ways that echo far beyond their actions. School life began to feel manageable again. My academic performance improved because the mental and emotional burden I had been carrying was lifted. I had space to breathe, to think, and to reclaim the years that had been clouded by fear and uncertainty. And Ethan, of course, continued to quietly observe, support, and offer guidance whenever necessary. One day, I was sitting in the library when a younger student approached me. A transfer, quiet, shy, and overwhelmed by the chaos of the new environment. They reminded me so much of Ethan when I first met him. I smiled gently and remembered the lesson he had taught me. Sometimes, all a person needs is someone who notices them, someone who offers a hand without judgment, without expectation. I invited the student to join me at a table and began sharing tips about navigating the new school. I introduced them to a few friendly classmates, encouraged them to speak up, and most importantly, just listened. It was a small gesture, but I knew that even a small gesture could change a life, just as Ethan had changed mine. The months turned into years. Ethan and I graduated, carrying forward the lessons we had learned. Our bond remained unbreakable, built on trust, shared experiences, and the extraordinary events that had defined our high school years. I went on to pursue a career in social work, determined to help those who felt invisible, unheard, and powerless. Every day, I carried the memory of Ethan's courage with me, the way he had risked his peace, his comfort, and his reputation to stand up for the truth. Ethan pursued psychology, specializing in trauma and resilience. He often said that what had happened with me had ignited a passion in him to understand human behavior, to recognize the patterns of fear, manipulation, and neglect that can devastate lives. And he wanted to ensure that no one else ever felt as helpless as I had felt. Even now, years later, when I reflect on everything, I realize how fragile life can be, and how powerful a single act of kindness, bravery, or attention can be. Ethan had been quiet, overlooked, and underestimated, but in the moment that truly mattered, he became my shield, my voice, and my lifeline. And that is a lesson I will carry forever. Courage is not always loud, and heroes are often those who appear invisible until the world demands otherwise. So if you've learned anything from this story, remember this. Notice the quiet ones. Stand up for those who cannot, when you can. Small acts of courage ripple outward in ways we may never fully understand. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of the friendship, the courage, and the resilience we shared, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. There are countless untold stories out there, stories of survival, hidden bravery, and life-changing friendships that need to be heard. By subscribing, you'll join a community that values truth, courage, and the quiet heroes who shape our lives in ways we often overlook. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. Let me know which moment in this story touched you the most. And remember, even the quietest voice can echo louder than anyone ever imagines. Stay tuned for more real-life stories with suspense, emotion, and lessons that stay with you long after the screen goes dark.